Hello, welcome to video number 8. This is all about consumer surplus and producer surplus. These are two concepts which are pretty straightforward. They're not too difficult, but we have to cover them. So I've put them together in this video to complete this week's videos. Right, so let's have a look at them now. Consumer surplus and producer surplus. Let's start with consumer surplus. Let's define it first of all. Consumer surplus is the difference between the price consumers are prepared to pay for a product and the market price. And on a diagram, we can find consumer surplus because it is an area surrounded by the price axis, the price level, and the demand curve. Let's go back to this. It's the difference between the price consumers are prepared to pay and the market price. Think about the last thing that you bought. Let's assume that the last thing you bought was a sandwich at lunchtime, if you're watching this in the afternoon. A sandwich at lunchtime. Let's say that you bought a cheese sandwich and it cost you, let's say you're in the UK, it cost you £2. Well, you decided it was worth it. You were hungry enough and there was few enough other items for sale, other places to go, and you had enough money in your pocket and you thought, yes, I'll pay £2 for a cheese sandwich, and you bought your cheese sandwich. Perhaps you were prepared to pay more than £2. Ask yourself, it's highly unlikely that the last thing you bought was priced at a price where you were not prepared to go any higher. If you did buy a cheese sandwich for £2, I'm sure you would have been prepared to pay £2.10 for it, or maybe £3 or £5. Seriously, ask yourself, what was the last thing you bought? What did you pay for it? And would you have paid more had it been slightly more expensive? If you were prepared to pay more, if you were prepared to pay £2.50 for the cheese sandwich, you had consumer surplus. It wasn't possible for the seller, the cafe or the sandwich bar, to be able to get inside your mind and know precisely how much you were prepared to pay. They would love to do that, because if they could squeeze more money out of you, of course they would do that. But they don't know that, so they have to go with their equilibrium price. Most of the time we do have consumer surplus, because most of the time when we buy things we were prepared to pay more, perhaps a lot more, certainly a little bit more. If we're not prepared to pay the price, if £2 was too much to pay for a cheese sandwich, you simply don't buy it. You don't have to buy it. So there must be very few people who, when they buy a product, they find it is precisely the price that they were willing to go up to, but no more. That's a bit unlikely. Now, there is one case where the seller is perhaps able to take the buyer right up to their maximum price, and that's in an auction. So if you're in an auction and you're bidding for a good, it's a way for the seller, who's only selling one item in an auction, to be able to locate which of the people in the bidding room, in the auction room, which person is actually prepared to pay the highest price. Because amongst themselves, they outbid each other until one is left. That was the person who was prepared to pay the highest price. But even with that person, we don't know how high they were willing to go. We only know they were willing to go a bit higher than the second person. Nevertheless, it is a good way of trying to get rid of consumer surplus by auctioning an item. That's not going to happen in a sandwich bar, is it? Or in a supermarket, or on all the other places we spend our money. So consumer surplus exists. It's the difference between what a consumer is prepared to pay for a good and the price they have to pay, the market price. And for all the consumers of a product, it's the combined differences between what each individual was prepared to pay and the market price. And as this says here, we can see consumer surplus on a diagram. Let's have a look at a diagram. Here's a diagram, market good, we have an equilibrium price, P1, quantity Q1. But we know that were the price to be higher, let's say the price was here, P2, well, there would still be some demand. This much would be sold, not as much. Some people will have dropped out of the market, but Plenty would still be sold. So there must be people in this market with consumer surplus, because we can see that were the price a little higher, there are still people prepared to pay for the product. But they don't have to pay a higher price. The price is P1. Well, if we add up all of the consumer surplus, we find that it's this area here. It is the area surrounded by the price axis, the price level, and the demand curve. And it's this area here. Okay? That's consumer surplus. How that can change, we'll come to in a minute. But let's now switch to producer surplus. Producer surplus is the difference between the price suppliers are willing to supply at and the market price. Now, people do get a little confused with this definition. You have to be precise with your definition. It's the difference between the price suppliers were willing to supply at and the market price. That sandwich shop was selling cheese sandwiches at £2. But perhaps if somehow the cheese sandwich price was to fall to £1.50, perhaps the sandwich bar would still be willing to make cheese sandwiches and sell them for £1.50. They're very happy that the price is higher, it's £2. They would be said to have producer surplus. You see, different suppliers are willing to supply products at different prices. You might run a sandwich bar and you might say, yes, I can buy bread and I can buy the services of a worker, and I can buy cheese, and I can pay for electricity, and I can buy some cutting knives and spreading butter, and I'll pay rent, and I can make it all work, and I can sell cheese sandwiches if the price is £1.50. I hope the price is higher, but if the price is £1.50, I can do it. Whereas I might run a sandwich bar less efficiently, and I might say, no, I can't make it work. I'm not prepared to supply cheese sandwiches at £1.50. I will if it's £2. But at £1.50 I can't make a profit. So I'm not willing to do it. You see, different suppliers will see different ways of employing factors of production, and will find different costs for their factors of production, and so won't have the same view on whether it's worth supplying or not at various prices. On a diagram, it is the area surrounded by the price axis, the price level, and the supply curve. Well, let's take a look at producer surplus then. Look at this market. Same diagram as before. There's an equilibrium price and quantity. Had the price been lower than P1, there would still be some firms saying, yes, we're willing to supply this good in this market. If the price had been here, P2, then we can see from this point on the supply curve that there would be some supply. There would be some supply in the market. That shows that there are some suppliers who are willing to supply, as long as the price is above here. If the price is below there, no supplier is willing to supply. But if the price is below P1 but above here, there is supply. And you know, as the price rises, more and more suppliers step into the market and say, now the price is high enough for me to go into business and buy the factors of production and sell the product. At the lower the price there's fewer of these. These must be very efficient suppliers who are able to supply even at a very low price. But if the market price is P1, there are suppliers who were willing to supply at lower prices, and they're very happy because they've got producer surplus. They can sell their product for a higher price, even though they were willing to sell it at a lower price. And as I said earlier, the area is the area surrounded by the price axis, the price level, and the supply curve. And so, of course, it's this area. This is the producer surplus. Okay? Now, when demand or supply curves shift, it affects the size of consumer and producer surplus. Let's have a look. Here's a market. There's the demand curve. There's the supply curve, price, quantity. And we have an equilibrium price of P1 and an equilibrium quantity of Q1. So, at the moment, here is the consumer surplus. Here is the producer surplus. Look, the way I've drawn my supply curve, It's not a triangle. It's a bit unusual to have a supply curve cutting the horizontal axis, but it's possible. And so don't think that producer surplus has to be a triangle. Consumer surplus will be a triangle as long as the demand curve meets the price axis. But I can still say this is consumer surplus. Now let's imagine that there is a rise in supply. Maybe the costs of production fell, maybe labour costs fell, maybe a tax that the government was charging was scrapped. Now there's a new equilibrium point, and there's a new price, P2, and a new quantity, Q2. Well, what's happened? You can see that when the supply shifted outwards, the consumer surplus, which had been here, has grown to include this section as well. This area here is additional consumer surplus because the price level fell. Think of that triangle of consumer surplus: price axis, price level, demand curve. Well, one side of that triangle just moved. As the price level fell, it extended the size of the consumer surplus. It also affected producer surplus. Producer surplus, which had been here, now, with the new equilibrium point here, became here. So producer surplus changed more significantly because two of the lines that border the area of producer surplus changed. The price level changed and the supply curve changed. So that's making it a more significant change in the area of producer surplus. If I redraw this to show a change in demand, let me clean the board. If I show a change in demand, you're going to see that producer surplus is the more easy change to register on the diagram. Here's demand curve, here's a supply curve, there's the equilibrium price, there's the equilibrium quantity, and now let's have a fall in demand. Demand falls to D2, price falls to P2, quantity falls as well, Q2. And what we see now is that producer surplus, which had of course been here, price axis, price level, supply curve, has fallen to only here. It fell by that area. So when demand curves shift, one side of the producer surplus changes, the price level. The supply curve never changed, the price axis never changed, only the price level changed. It fell from there to there. So it's as if this area of producer surplus had that much snipped off it. Whereas the consumer surplus, which had been here, became this area. This area. There we are. So two parts of the consumer surplus changed, the price level and the demand curve, making it a less easy change to show. Okay, well, I hope that helps, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.